It's great to have you all on the line tonight. I'm Paul Costello. I'm the director of the Vermont Council on Rural Development, but more to the point, I'm the chair of the local recovery and community solutions working group of the task force, the Governor's Recovery Task Force. And I'm welcoming you all to the Franklin County Forum. This is the first county-wide forum that we've put together. So we're trying out new technologies. We're trying out a strong agenda. We've worked with a great steering committee of local leaders to frame an agenda, to dig in forums around topics that are of pertinence to the future of recovery and resilience in Franklin County. And we're deeply honored to have you all with us. I'm going to turn it to the administrative liaison from the Agency of Commerce, Josh Hanford, Commissioner of Housing and Community Affairs, to share some welcoming reflections from the administration. Josh.
Thanks, Paul. Good evening, everyone. As Paul said, I'm Josh Hanford, Commissioner of Vermont Department of Housing and Community Development, and the liaison for the Local Solutions and Community Action Team, which is part of the Governor's larger Economic Recovery and Mitigation Task Force. And on behalf of the Agency of Commerce, Community Development, and the Governor, just want to really thank everyone for coming out tonight and participating in this virtual forum. This is, you know, new way of doing business for all of us. And thanks for coming out on such a nice evening. And you know, what I just want to say real briefly is that in many ways we're struggling with finding a way to say that we're in recovery already with this pandemic. You know, we know there's still a lot of response going on. But we need to start planning for that recovery. And we all know that recovery starts local, and that, you know, that's what we're here to talk to you about, learn from folks in the county about how to best plan for that recovery in Franklin County, and build on what's already been started and share what your successes are as we go on this summer and fall with other regions of the state. So just thanks for coming out tonight and participating, and also for all the other team members from the Local Solutions and Community Action Team on this this call. You know, thanks for all your work and the heavy lift here. So thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Josh. The Governor, when he structured his recovery effort, he had one group that was really looking at the immediate financial needs of businesses for its recovery. He had another group that was really looking at the feathering process of reopening businesses, at the protocols for the first stages of recovery. And then he had our group, which was really looking, I think he recognized that all solutions aren't going to come from Washington, D.C., or from the monies that may come from Washington, D.C., that recovery isn't just going to come from Montpelier, that it comes town to town, it comes from community groups, it comes from people who put themselves on the line for their communities. And there's an enormous power in trying to add up some of that energy, some of those stories. And when you think about all the work that's being done, probably all of you are engaged in one way or another. All the work that's being done in Franklin County and the other counties in Vermont, we need to learn from each other. So he really turned to us to say, let's look at best practices and models that are going on in different communities that could be shared, that we could mutually educate and encourage ourselves. So when we think about the way that we're using these county-wide forums, we really have a few primary purposes. We want to hear from local folks about the challenges that they're facing. We want to share some best practices in the topic areas that the county wants to explore. And those are the 4 areas that Jenna will go through in a minute. We want to share what other places have done, but we also want to learn what you're doing. What creative ideas have emerged in your community and in Franklin County that we could then take on the road to Brattleboro and Rutland County and other places around the state as they struggle with how they're going to move forward. We also want to be sure, as we reach out to Vermonters in this age of deep challenge to us, and that challenge goes everywhere from the health challenge to the economic challenge to the challenge of how we work together in unity as a people, that we listen to people, that everyone is infinitely valuable as a Vermonter for our future. And that means we want to listen to people and all listen to each other. And so bear with us through this process. Let's pay attention to what each of us has to say. And let's especially reach out and understand that the COVID crisis has hurt some of us worse than others, people who are most challenged, people who have been historically marginalized in our communities. And this is a time to look more deeply at these issues and see how we partner together to make progress. So that's a second thing. We also are going to be listening hard. We have a great resource team with us tonight that's going to be in each of these separate focus forums. And they're going to be thinking through what's going on in the conversation to think about ways that they may be able to help, how they could potentially provide technical assistance, what potential funding resources may be available. We're not going to build a big strategic plan for Franklin County tonight, but we may find some nuts and bolts of work that can follow this call and where we can build connections to help people in the county move forward. Finally, all of these conversations are going to be an incredible window into the heart and soul of Vermont. And we're deeply excited about hearing what Franklin County is doing. And then as we go to the next counties, as we move around the state, what are the fundamental issues that are ongoing challenges, barriers, and opportunities that we can be then sharing with the governor and the administration and legislators and other policymakers to help the state step up and meet you all halfway and help build something bigger than we can do if we're all in our own corners. So it's an awesome opportunity for us. I deeply appreciate everyone being on the phone with us. And I'm going to turn to Jenna Kolowski, who's the VCRD Community Programs Manager, and who's going to walk us through the agenda and gear us up for our breakouts. Jenna?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being on the call. So we have to head over into our breakouts now, but we really want to take some time to just walk through how to get there, because as Paul said, this and Josh, this is a new way of interacting for us. We'd really prefer to be with you all in person, but this is the way we figured that we could all connect, and I want to walk through how to do it. So the schedule for this evening, in just a second here, we're going to head into our breakouts. I want to thank the steering committee of regional leaders and representatives that came together to help identify the topics for the breakout discussions and the issues that are most important to address in Franklin County today. So our topics are supporting municipalities in recovery, overcoming isolation and building community connection, advancing telecommunications access and affordability, and supporting Franklin County businesses. And in each of those breakouts, you'll have a facilitator to guide the discussion. We have a series of questions we want to walk through to collect input and to facilitate the sharing of ideas and strategies. But we're also going to have some time for folks on the visiting team to share some recovery strategies that they're implementing in their region. And then at the end, to reflect on the conversation and share some potential resources and ways that they or others might be able to support the work in Franklin County.
Thank you so much, everybody, for joining this session. My name is Ben Doyle. I'm an area director for USDA Rural Development. We're part of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Economic Development Wing, and our mission is to improve the quality of life and economic vitality of rural America. And we do that by making strategic investments in rural communities in a lot of different ways, mostly housing, but also in essential community infrastructure, things like water systems or broadband technology. So I'm really happy to be facilitating this session. We've got some really great experts here who have a lot of deep knowledge about the technology. I don't have that. I think Paul and Jenna asked me to do this because I'm a former high school English teacher, and I'm obsessed with the clock and making sure that we get our homework done. So I'm going to be kind of just making sure that the conversation moves along and that we kind of have an open and honest conversation about the challenges facing Franklin County in this area. So again, this is the session on advancing telecommunications access and affordability. And I don't think I need to state the obvious other than COVID has really, this was an issue before for much of Vermont. And I think COVID-19 has really thrown into stark relief how critical e-connectivity, broadband technology, telecommunications are really for a society, civil society to function. And so it's a really important topic, and I'm glad that you were able to join us. So I just want to be, I just want to cover a couple things. Paul already covered most of them, but I just want to really reiterate that, I work for USDA. This forum is being hosted by VCRD, Vermont Council on Rural Development, but we're not here to tell anybody how to do things. We're really here to facilitate a neutral conversation, to really gather ideas, to listen. For an agency like mine that, we're a federal agency funded by taxpayer dollars, we really want to know what you folks need or what your ideas are so that we can make sure we're putting your tax dollars to work in the right way. So I would just ask that everybody, Zoom, I think, is new for a lot of us, but I think if we can just keep that sense of like we're in a room together and be respectful of one another and one another's ideas, I think we'll have a really positive conversation. I really quickly just want to go through the kinds of questions that we're going to talk about. It's going to be a pretty structured conversation. I hope that's okay, but we really want to make sure we get some kind of critical questions answered, and we want to hear your feedback. So we're going to start off with about 5 minutes of Jeremy Hansen, who's joined us from CV Fiber. It's a great resource. He's going to share a kind of story from his community or a project that he's worked on around accessing telecommunications. And that's, again, not meant to tell you folks what you should do, but to maybe kind of spark some ideas about what's unique about your community, what's happening in your community, what would you like to see happen in your community. And so that's what Jeremy will kind of set the table for us in that way. And from there, we'll ask the question, well, what do you want for your community, right? And we'll spend about 10 minutes of folks talking about what does telecommunications access mean for you and what do you want for your community. Then we'll spend about another 10 minutes saying, okay, we know what we want, but what's holding us back? What's the problem? Why aren't we where we want to be? And then we're going to spend about 20 minutes talking about, well, what's already happening? Who's already working on this? Are there promising strategies or practices or programs that are already happening in your region that could move this work forward? And then we'll kind of end it with spending another 20 minutes talking about, well, what are the additional action steps that are needed? What can you folks do as a local community to advance this issue? And what are some of the resources that you need, whether that's technical assistance or funding or what are the other action steps you can take to advance this sector? And then finally, before we go back to the larger group to kind of report back about this conversation at 8:10, we're going to spend a little bit of time hearing from Rob Fish, who's from the Vermont Public Service Department and is a fantastic resource when it comes to supporting communities trying to improve broadband access. And then we'll hear from Ed Valandry, who is Ed, I don't even really know how to describe it. Entrepreneur up in the kingdom, and Ed, you can tell us what it is you do, but a VCRD member and a really a great resource in the kingdom. So with that, does anybody have any questions about what it is we're trying to do and what the outcomes are supposed to be? Great. Well, then I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy to spend, Jeremy, just want to be cognizant of the clock, maybe take about 5 minutes to really talk to us about Central Vermont Fiber, the issues that you faced in your region and how folks work to address them.
Sure. All right. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, everybody, for coming. I'm Jeremy Hansen. I'm from Berlin. I'm a recovering Berlin Select Board member, and that's kind of where this path started. I had, residents and myself would complain about the internet service in Berlin, and we're just down the road from Montpelier. Montpelier has pretty decent internet connectivity. Berlin, there are parts of it that do, parts of it that don't. And so I'm also, my day job is I'm a computer science professor at Norwich University. So I knew a little bit about this before I went and started doing any legwork, and looked at the model of EC Fiber. EC Fiber is something called a Communications Union District, and they're down to the south of us, so kind of east central Vermont. And they have a little bit more than 20 towns, and they're something like so a communications union district is like a water district, sewer district, school district. So it encompasses a number of different towns. It is a municipal entity, so it's sort of like a super town. We're required to abide by all the same rules as any other municipal entity. So as chair, I have to put out an agenda, and we have to, have public comment, and all of our, meeting minutes and things like that are all public record and open meetings, all these sorts of things. I learned about EC Fiber, and I decided that we would essentially try to copy EC Fiber as well as we could. So it didn't end up panning out exactly that way, but we, I went and talked to about a dozen select boards and got the select boards to put items on the town meeting ballot to create the communications union district. Long story short, we are now at 18. We'll be at 19 next week. We just added the town of Washington. So using federal funding, thanks, Ben. Part of that's USDA rural development money. Part of that's from Vermont Public Service Department. Thanks, Rob. And also from the Agency for Community and Commerce and Community Development. So, we've had some help along the way. We've had some fantastic volunteers, and we are at the point now where we've done a feasibility study. We're doing our business plan. We'll be going after some loan money that comes from VEDA, so Vermont Economic Development Agency, that was put in place by the legislature. Thank you, Senator Brock, Representative Hango, for that work last year, and then the additional work that funds some communication union district costs. We will be building fiber, so gigabit speed fiber will be starting next year. The actual, boots on the ground, wires on the pole, engineering is going to be starting before long, frankly. So, public entity, no profit motive. Our only job is to serve our member communities with internet service. So, if eventually everybody's going to get hooked up.
Great. Jeremy, thanks so much. And, it's pretty inspiring to see these communication union districts really forming around the state. And, you've really been an inspiration to a lot of folks. I do want to reiterate, that's really meant to be an example of how one community saw a need in telecommunications and developed a strategy and moved it forward. It doesn't mean that it's the strategy for you folks or that it addresses your challenges, but it is meant to show that folks working together can start to make a difference. And then I would also just point out too, I'm really excited to hear about what are the challenges in your area, but we know that it's not just technology, right? That you can have the fiber to the home, you can have great broadband, but if folks can't afford it, if it's not affordable or for a variety of reasons not accessible to everyone, it's still not where we want to be. So I just want to make sure that that's part of our conversation as well. But with that, I would open it up to all of you. Really, why was this selected as a topic for this community? What are the needs in Franklin County when it comes to telecommunication access? And anybody wants to just kick it off, we'd really appreciate it. Yes, please, Representative Hango.
Thank you. This is an issue that's really near and dear to my heart because throughout this time when we've been home through the state of emergency, I have gotten many calls and emails and texts from constituents who live too far out to have service that's affordable for them, or they have very unreliable internet that can't be upgraded. Any number of complaints that I've fielded. I have gone to some of the utilities and gotten some resolution for certain customers, for certain constituents, some of them who are not my constituents, but particularly ones that are in the school district that I'm on the school board for. And those people have been able to take advantage of a program that was specific for families with children in schools. That's since ended. So my concern is I still have a lot of people who do not have internet access. I think there's the vast majority of people who have less than the recommended 25.3. There's virtually no one unless you live right in the village of Enosburg, or Richford, maybe Franklin, who have 100 megabits per second download. So it's a real concern here because people are working from home, they're going to school from home, they're college students who are taking online classes from home. So that's really my big concern is lack of access and unaffordability. I got an email last night from a fellow school board member who said that she was told by her utility that sure, she could get an upgrade and it was going to cost $65,000. So that's what they're offering.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Let me add a couple of things on this issue. Good. This is probably one of the most significant economic development issues that Vermont has right now. We're becoming a state that has two faces. One is an urban Vermont and the other is a second-class rural Vermont. And so much of Franklin County falls in that area. And the differentiator is the availability of broadband. Broadband adds value to homes. Broadband makes areas more attractive for in-migration. It's a way to help deal with our demographic crisis. And it's also an essential for being in the 21st century. These communications districts that we authorized some time ago are the future, and there are a couple of them that affect Franklin County that are beginning or in various formative stages right now. And we've talked with a number of communities about creating these kinds of things. In this bill that we passed, H966 in the last session, it will help, and it uses some of the federal COVID money, the CARES Act money, to help advance and move forward, but it's very, very limited. And the strings that the feds put on us make it very difficult to make tremendous progress because all the money has to be used in projects that are committed and up and running by the end of the year. And the notion of creating poles and fibers between now and November, which is the practical end of the year for construction, makes it very, very difficult. We do have a mix of things, including a program that will expand broadband from existing lines to homes that are further away by subsidizing the cost to individuals to extend those lines. We have some fiber projects that are at various stages of completion that will be funded that way. And we're also looking to some extent at wireless solutions, fixed wireless solutions that can bring broadband at fairly high speeds. In other words, broadband by the federal definition to people without doing wiring, at least in the short run. And that's part of a longer program. But there are lots of chunks of money coming in future years that we can see right now and putting this all together in a package. But our goal is to get broadband to every home in Vermont within a reasonable period of time and to do it at very high speeds that are synchronous. So that's where we're going.
Thank you very much, Senator Brock. We really appreciate that and your leadership in the legislature on this. You know, I think I do want to dig in more to what's already happening and what are those moving pieces so that we can all think about how do they work together. But I just want to make sure that we're really capturing, remember what we're trying to do here as a visiting team is listen to you folks and report back what we're hearing. And so, you know, Representative Hango, when you're talking about just the affordability and how it's adversely affecting students, right? You know, can we hear more about for your region, you know, what do you want for your region when it comes to telecommunication access and what are some of the challenges?
I can jump back in and make a few more comments on that. What I would really like to see is that all students have some access to the internet. I know it's not going to be high speed right away, but there have been students who have been left out of remote learning totally. There are other students whose families have gone to great lengths, driving to public libraries and other public buildings that have hotspots and sitting out in the parking lot for hours to do their work. And it's not just students. We have a great number of federal employees in this area who are depending on internet to do their jobs. We also have state employees in the area. in fact, myself, I had an experience one day where I could not participate in voting on an issue that called for internet and phone service, and I had neither.
Yeah.
So it is a problem, and I guess I would like to see that everybody has a way somehow of accessing, even if it's temporary, even if it's just for the school year for students, because that was really quite disturbing to me, that students were going without learning because of that. And the administration did, the school administrations, they did try really hard sending home paper copies on the buses that went around with meals, but some students just really did kind of check out, and that was disturbing.
Great. Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm starting to see the hands now, so forgive me, Jonathan. If you could unmute yourself and go, and then I see Kim also has something she'd like to say.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Billings. I'm Vice President at Northwestern Medical Center, and would add to the education and the federal wars complication, the use of telemedicine in Northwestern Vermont. That during COVID, we have used telemedicine to great lengths, both at the hospital and through our physician practices. Our partners at Northwestern Counseling and Support Services have done mental health work through telemedicine, and even Franklin County Home Health is using it for remote visits. And it is a remarkably efficient and welcomed technology. There were people who were afraid that the elderly in our community would not embrace it, and we have found that to be the opposite. They appreciate the convenience and the lack of need to worry about transportation, and they're all FaceTiming their grandchildren. So it's very familiar to them. And yet it has become apparent that it is an equity issue in healthcare, that just as you have students who don't have access or are getting left out of lessons, you have patients who can't access their care. And right now, more than 50% of our physician office visits are being done via telemedicine. And so it is significant. And going forward, we think it's part of, even if COVID goes away and we are back to normal, we think telemedicine has proven itself and is part of healthcare's future in Vermont. And so that equity issue of being able to reach folks dependably is critical within healthcare as well. So thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you so much for sharing that perspective. And it reminds me actually of Senator Brock talking about how this is an economic development issue or in education. You know, you could see that so much of this change maybe was inevitable, but that COVID has accelerated the need for it so much, right? And I think in medicine is a classic example of how we're going to see it accelerate. Kim, can you share, please, your ideas?
Sure. First of all, I apologize for some of my faces. I'm down at Lake Carmine, and we had the eagle fly right by us, so it's sort of shocking and beautiful. So I'm a little bit different person. I'm with Franklin Telephone Company, and we do provide fiber to the home. We have for, I don't know, 6 or 7 years now. We're not 100%. We've been building like crazy, but from a provider standpoint, you know, Vermont's very rural, and it's very expensive to build to. And the builds we've been doing this season are, you know, several miles and a handful, you know, 5 customers. So it's very expensive. And then when we hook up the customers, they want the economical package. There's very few that take the higher end. It's nice to have that option, because one thing I learned early on with the internet business and with fiber is it's been very hard for me to predict who would want what services. Like earlier, you know, we thought originally senior citizens, you know, and it's a mixture. There's economics factors. The schooling is everything's a whole new ballgame right now, but it's expensive. And not just to build it, but you also have to maintain it and do that network. And there's frustration on our part. We know of two school students that did not have internet access, and it was because they did not call our office. Not that it wasn't available. And I know the school talked to them several times, but I can't just show up on the door and say, here's your internet you didn't sign up for. So it's a struggle. So you have to understand that part of the piece. It's expensive to build, but it's also, if people are just buying the minimum package, that doesn't help pay for it. But as a provider, we're here and we've been building like crazy, and that's our plan, is to build out where we can. But there's challenges. I know of one road that it's a mile long, 8 customers, and none of them are next to the road. So even putting fiber down that road, I don't get it to the customer's house because they all have, you know, several poles or buried underground. And so it's those challenges. And I do encourage, you know, we've been in business 120 years. I do encourage people to reach out to their utilities to try to work for solutions. Some of our fiber bills previously was somebody went down the road and all their neighbors said, we'll take fiber, which is an increase $12 a month. And so we built that road. So it's helpful for people to have that perspective. It's a business, it costs money. So.
Thank you, Kim. That's a really valuable perspective. So thank you for bringing it. And you're actually helping us kind of transition to the next the next question, which is what's holding this region back, right? Like we've heard about medicine, the schools, economic development, just quality of life issues, right? That are critically important to have telecommunications access. And now we're starting to get into that part of the conversation where what's holding us back from achieving this. And, you know, Kim, you brought up the kind of elephant in the room around affordability, right? Both to install, maintain, and access. Representative Hango, did you have something else that you wanted to add?
I did. I wanted to speak for a second on 2 different things. Jonathan Billings brought up telemedicine, and I am on the board at Franklin County Home Health Agency also, and that was a big issue for us. We were talking about what was going to be the biggest problem for telemedicine, and it certainly wasn't going to be people accepting the idea. It was going to be actually having the technology to do it. So that's been a struggle. And then I wanted to speak to Kim Gates and Franklin Telephone. Franklin Telephone it's a great local small operation, family owned, that you can go to and you can call your utility and you can talk to a real person who knows where you live and what the situation is there. Franklin is really unique. The rest of my legislative district isn't so fortunate to have Franklin Telephone. We have some big providers, and the only way to get any resolution to what I consider to be fairly big stumbling blocks for people to have access is for people to call me, and I have to go through the government relations people of a multi-state corporation to try to get some resolution for an employee who can't do his work because his kids are trying to do their work and nobody's getting any satisfaction. So we really appreciate the small utilities like Franklin Telephone, and appreciate that there is a real detriment to trying to go down a road several miles where there are only a few houses. That's really expensive. But I feel that if we have access to these big corporations who are providing us with service, that cost can be spread out a little bit better, and the rural people that they serve can be served.
Great, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Sean, do you have something you'd like to share?
I do, yeah. You were mentioning barriers. I think everyone would agree, obviously funding is always nice. From what I've seen here for our local efforts in Enosburg, it really comes down to resident awareness and education on convincing them that it is a necessity. That's really where we've seen, trying to advocate for the cause and getting people behind it. is really convincing someone that this is something that it's something they want, their children are going to want, that the values that come along with it, the higher property values, the having access to be able to do smart home technologies or energy efficiency. We had partnered with Efficiency Vermont to help us do some workshops to showcase some home efficiency items that require some internet connection to be able to utilize those. And we're still working on advocating for the cause and getting people behind it. That's really from Enosburg standpoint is a barrier or a challenge.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. That's a really a valuable one. And also, I mean, you're also anticipating the idea of some strategies, right? There's a lot of work that can be done, or best practices around making sure resident awareness, as you said, in education. I see Everett McGinley has his hand raised. Everett, do you have something you'd like to share?
Hi, Everett McGinley. I'm in Montgomery, and you're not seeing a video from me because I don't have enough bandwidth for that. I was the chair, or perhaps still am, of the broadband committee here in Montgomery, which was part of the Montgomery Thrives process from VRCD, which has been very, very successful in a couple of other areas. But our broadband effort really kind of fizzled out. And I think the reasons for that were a few. One, it seemed like such a daunting prospect for a town of 12 or 1,300 people to take on. There are examples like Craftsbury where a small town has done it with help from various private and public agencies. But it just didn't seem urgent enough, or it seemed like too daunting of a prospect. I think the attitude in our town has changed as people have had to try to get by and do video conferencing and try to work from home, and been enormously frustrated in trying to do that. So I am hopeful that we have come to a point where we can restart perhaps our broadband initiative, and these communication unit districts seem to be exactly the right thing. And so some assistance in forming these communication units district, perhaps together with Enosburg and some of the other local towns where there's obviously a bit more population than there is in Montgomery. This may be the moment when we can get back to that and make it work. It is certainly desperately needed in Montgomery, as it is in many other towns, for all the reasons people mentioned: economic, lifestyle, telemedicine, school, education, real estate. We feel these things quite keenly. So I'm encouraged that perhaps we can restart.
Everett, thank you for sharing that. And while I'm sorry that the efforts fizzled a little bit there, I think you're right in that this is really going to help people recognize the urgency of the moment. And I also just quickly have to say, Everett, Montgomery was a topic of conversation in our office today, and Montgomery Thrives in particular, with the incredible work that your committee did on wastewater infrastructure and streetscaping and getting that bond vote passed. I mean, that to me is a testament of people believing in their future. And I'm sure that kind of good momentum can potentially move forward in broadband as well. Senator Brock, you have your hand up?
I did, partially to address one of the things that Kim raised regarding the local telephone companies. One of the things that we did include in the bill H966 that passed this year is some direct payments to individuals who need line extensions in order to bring broadband from existing carriers to their homes. Unfortunately, we were only able to come up with about $2 million for that purpose. But when we come back in late August, there are additional federal CARES money that, again, may be made available possibly to extend that program if it's successful. One of the important things is to get feedback from people and from providers such as Franklin Telephone as to whether or not there is enough money and whether it's meaningful. I think we limited it in this case to $3,000 per customer in order to extend those lines for those purposes of education and telemedicine and so on. We are not going to be able to do all of the things that we need in telecommunications this year. But one of the things that we have done is we've gotten our joint fiscal office together to look at all the potential sources of funding that are in the pipeline from various sources, ranging from the Department of Agriculture to some of our other telecommunications funds that are coming from the federal government, so that we can put together a longer-term plan to begin determining how we are actually going to get broadband. For aiding people in forming communications union districts, that's why Rob Fish's position was created by the legislature this past year, because we know that in order to get this done in places like Montgomery, that don't have the benefit of a Franklin telephone at their fingertips, to be able to have communications union districts, but be supported with expertise from state government in order to help them get that done.
Great, thank you so much. Who else? Anybody else want to chime in? And just a reminder, what we're really talking about right now is, are there promising practices or strategies or programs that are emerging today in your region? I mean, really what this is about is, who's already working on this? What are the assets that already exist? So for example, we know that we have a local player, right, in the Franklin telephone that's been doing this work for a long time and understands the territory. We've got folks in Enosburg that are really thinking about, how do we educate our residents and provide information around opportunities like smart grid. You know, there's the work being done in the legislature right now to address these different kinds of needs. What other strategies are happening in Franklin County or actions that are happening right now that could potentially move this work forward? Everett, I see you have your hand raised again.
Yeah, so most of us are served by Vermont Co-op as an electric utility. And of course, they own the poles. And that's one way to get the fiber distributed. Most of us are also served by Consolidated Communications. And, you know, that has seemed to be very much a dead end in terms of their investing in any sort of infrastructure. That does not appear to be their business plan nor their intent. So I'm wondering if what the interaction has been with the communications union districts or other at other levels with Vermont Electric Co-op. Would they be supportive of having their poles utilized, or even joining in a program to extend broadband? There are also other independent companies that specialize in fiber rollouts, and they could be valuable partners as well.
Great, thank you, Everett.
I can partially answer that question. I think Rob can probably do a better job of giving some more context about VEC and some of the other similar efforts that are going on in Franklin County. I would like to hear from him.
Rob, can you jump in, Rob?
Certainly. Yes, the electric co-ops are heavily involved in the efforts of the communication union districts. They are working closely with the district with Jeremy's district, CV Fiber, with the effort in the Kingdom, and with the new communication union district that is about to form. I think 5 towns have voted now in Lamoille County. They are also part of the Federal Communications, the FCC has a program called the RDOF, Rural Development Opportunity Fund. That's a reverse auction that's taking place in the fall. Those utilities, along with several of the CUDs, are working together to bid on some of those census blocks to get more funds to come in to build out fiber. I want to touch on one other thing and kind of tip our hand here. Sean can talk a little bit more about it too, and I'm so glad to hear what you had to say, Everett, but there is a new effort to create a communications union district in Franklin County as of a few days ago. And I'm sure they would love for Montgomery to be involved with Enosburg and Fairfax, and I don't have an update on the outreach over the last few days, but things are happening.
Sign us up.
What? I'm sorry?
I said, sign us up.
Okay, yes.
Great. What other strategies or things that are happening right now in the community? You know, I think just going back to maybe thinking more about the telemedicine or what's happening in the schools. Are you seeing kind of any innovative practices in your region that seem to be working and maybe could be amplified or brought to other parts of the state that are facing similar challenges? I don't know if anybody can. Anybody seeing, again, I guess the question is, you know, what else is happening in this area that's been positive? What's helping people get access during this kind of time of crisis?
Well, I think it's not ideal, but the hotspots have certainly helped quite a number of people get access. But, you know, I've seen teachers in the parking lot of a school sitting there for 8 hours working with students from their car on a computer or on a phone. So it's certainly not ideal, but that's been good. There's also the town of Highgate installed I'm not sure what it's called, but it became a hotspot, and that's well utilized there. And that's at the town offices. And the public libraries left their Wi-Fi turned on even when they were closed for business. So that's been helpful for people as well.
That's great. Thank you.
Just to carry on that, I just posted in the chat a link to all the Wi-Fi hotspots we've identified or installed around the state, and you'll see there are quite a few in Franklin County. I believe we hit most towns.
That's
and there's
excellent.
still a few available.
What do you mean by that, Rob, when you say there's still a few available? Tell us more about that.
There's about 5 that have yet to be deployed that we're holding out looking for additional locations. In many ways, it was first come, first serve based on our own research. We did a survey and discovered what hotspots exist in the state, and then looked to see where they did not exist, where they were not, and focused on those towns. But we have since moved to the point of where we're looking for, if there's special needs or special opportunities, we want to be able to serve those. So there's currently about 5 left. There may eventually be more, but that is what is left at this point. From looking at my map, we've installed the one in Highgate, Enosburg, Fairfield, Fairfax. I'm trying to figure where the county, Montgomery, Richford. I don't know where the county boundaries are exactly, but there's quite a few up there that we've installed. There's also an interactive map on the website that shows ones that were reported by the schools or by the libraries, the town office, or from the public that were crowdsourced.
That's great. Thank you, Rob. And you've shared that information in the chat.
Yes, the link is in the chat.
Excellent. Great. Sean, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I was just gonna reiterate the hotspot that we installed a few weeks ago has been well received. I serve as kind of the system admin and watch usage rates on my phones, and it gets a good amount of use at the emergency services building. Quite a few people have come and written me emails and said, this is great. When I have poor service at home, I can go to the emergency services building and sit outside in the parking lot to be able to take a call or do some schoolwork. So it's been really helpful to be able to have that available now.
That's great. And I suspect maybe you're already doing this, Sean, but I think it would be really fascinating to share maybe some of that usage information with folks like Rob or with this committee, right? To see how many people actually are using this, when they're using it, those kinds of things. Ed, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, maybe it's a good time for me to chime in. My name is, I live in the NEK in Peacham, and I've been on the governor's task force here for the local recovery. And actually something that very few people knew on that task force is I actually spent my entire career in broadband, working mainly in metropolitan broadband build-outs, strategically helping companies find investors and helping them route networks and identify ways to basically build out fiber networks and telecommunication networks. And I married a Vermonter, moved up here about 10 years ago, although I kind of spent a lot of my time traveling all various places to do this work. But really what has stuck out to me is, even before COVID, but actually much more now, is sort of the massive lack of equity in our system, that many people in our state and in rural areas in the country don't have broadband. And I heard in a much better, more nuanced and effective way from all of you, those challenges from ability or inability to pay, lack of education, the economics being prohibitive for those that have been building networks thus far to build out to these homes that are far off of the existing network. I get it all, and I think it's incredibly unfair, and I think the pandemic has shined a very bright light on that. You know, with that said, the other thing that I've heard, as well as this glimmer of hope, which I think is actually a really great opportunity for our state, which are the incoming, you know, CARES Act funds, as well as the RDOF auction that Rob mentioned. I really do think now is the time and place to get this done and to build out broadband effectively to the entire state and to very rural areas, both in my neck of the woods as well as yours in Franklin County. And I think it's going to be a very critical period here that we all get our voices heard and we identify gaps that we have and that we organize. And, you know, effectively, I think that at the end of the day, there hopefully, knock on woods, will be funds that make it, and relationships that are made that make it such that over the next few years, these networks get built and everyone has connectivity. And those that cannot afford get subsidies as well to afford. And one of my projects I worked on a few years back was called Connect to Compete, which actually was a subsidy provided to mainly inner city folks who could not afford broadband, so that they could, and really the way to qualify for it back then at least was if you were a recipient of you know, subsidized lunch at school as a family, you basically would get broadband. I think it was for about $5 a month. So I strongly believe those funds should be made available to rural areas as well, not only to subsidize the funding once that the network gets built, but also to help build the network. So I hear all of you loud and clear. I know many of you have been putting a lot of effort into this. I heard Kim and the effort she's made with her company. I think there's a lot more to do for the other areas outside of her territory. And hopefully there's some solutions here. But I think, again, all of you bringing to everyone's attention the needs that are out there and organizing is really the best way to be heard. So I really appreciate that.
Great. And thank you so much. That's a really valuable perspective. I guess I kind of want to actually kind of building on that, maybe shift the focus to our kind of next question, which is, you know, what are the action items that still need to happen locally, regionally, or at the state level? I mean, Ed, you mentioned the idea of just organizing, right? And we know that there's some great efforts underway with the Communication Union District, or, you know, again, Kim, your company's already working on this kind of stuff. But again, if we think about those three kinds of buckets, locally, regionally, and then at the state level, what do you folks think needs to happen to move this work forward? Senator Brock, see you have your hand up.
Well, I was going to deal with a slightly different issue, but
that's fine.
What you just said does, I think, dovetail with that. And that is one of the things that we need to hear, I think, more of is from people. When there are issues, to bring them up and contact your legislators and contact the officials such as the Public Service Department. We had, for example, was it a week or so ago, Consolidated Communications was down for about 3 days, and it's very unclear as to what extent it was down and whether or not the information that we got is in fact correct. I would be very interested in hearing from this group and from people that you know, were you affected by that and what was the impact? So it's critically important that you feed information to us so that we can in fact react and do with it. We're exclusively talking here about broadband, but that's not the only telecommunications issue that there is. Cell coverage is also part of that rural-urban divide. And particularly here in Franklin County, we have vast areas where there is not coverage. And again, to the extent that we hear from people with concerns about that, and particularly, you know, I look at the maps that some of the large cell phone providers put out, saying that we have coverage in this area, and you drive in that area and there's no coverage. We'd like to hear about that too.
That's great, Senator. And so again, just kind of putting in the framework, you're suggesting just that one of the things that could happen is folks just need to be more vocal. right? Both with their legislators, with the public service department, with their provider, but just maybe a kind of even a kind of organized way in which to, you know, voice frustration or hopes for the future of what can happen. Great. Does anybody else have ideas, again, of what needs to happen? What could happen at the local level? What could happen at the regional level? Point of view from Franklin County of what needs to happen at the state level? You know, and I mean, I think I'll say this, that, you know, our listening team is really here to do that, to listen. And yet at the same time, it's hard when you know that they have some perspectives that they might be able to share. So I would also encourage them, if you have ideas about what can be happening locally, regionally, at the state, feel free to jump in with some best practices. Rob, please.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to talk about communication union districts for a second. I'm going to talk about the need for additional coordination. I keep looking back to some of the major redevelopment, the real estate projects that have happened in the state, whether it's in Bennington or in Barrie, and it required getting 30 to 40 different financial partners and instruments together to make things happen. A lot of the issues that the communication union districts, back to them, are having right now is they're trying to raise money without having assets to raise them. So they don't have the assets to leverage, whether it's to be able to get the VETA loan, to be able to get a revenue bond, or to raise money in other ways. They're entirely dependent on local donations, which is a challenge when everybody needs donations at this point, or finding investors on their own. So one role that I see, it's another technical assistance role, but it's different than the role that I'm playing, is really a project developer. Someone who has that background in finance and pulling all those partners together in a collaborative fashion with the community groups, whether it's an individual town or the communication union district, to package the financing. So that's me going way out on a limb of one of the things that we're looking at as we look to other funding resources. We have a pending application with Northern Borders that would be able to get some money to help cover the 10% community match to be able to leverage a VETA loan. We're also looking at funds from EDA. There's a lot of different pieces that are happening and that we're trying to pull together at the moment. But
you know, Rob, that's a really great point. And I'm thinking about the expertise so often that the regional development corporations provide, or the regional planning associations. You know, when you look to a project like the Putnam Block in Bennington, the major redevelopment that Rob mentioned, you know, that's the RDC and the RPC working together really to provide some leadership about how do you structure a deal of that kind of complexity. And it strikes me that, you know, the regional planning associations and development corporations are already playing such a great and important role in the broadband space, but maybe there's a way to kind of amplify that.
Yes.
And continue to give them some more capacity. Other ideas about, excuse me, my visitors, they're back from swimming early. Other ideas? Other things that could happen? Senator Brock, I mean, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot, I mean, what do you see that you've offered some great advice around folks need to contact their legislators and advocate for this, but can I ask, do you have ideas about what you see needing to happen at the state level to kind of move this stuff forward?
Well, at the state level, one of the things that is the common denominator in all of this is money. And that's a major part of our job, is to marshal the various funds that are available and put them together in a plan that actually has a strategy behind it. That's something that we're doing right now, and working with the Public Service Department, using the legislature's Joint Information Technology Oversight Committee. The state needs a 10-year plan, telecommunications plan. It supposedly has one, and it really doesn't. But we need a strategy so that all these various pieces come together, so that we can ensure that we haven't left anyone and anything out. That is a major task, and that's on our plate to deliver on it. But we need the public service department engaged with us to make that happen, because again, they're the ones that actually turn the wheels and the spigots. We need to hear from people in terms of what they want, because trying to do this top down is not the right way to do it. We need to hear what people need and want, what people think is missing. And some folks speak up, a lot of folks do not. These communications union districts are a great forum to be able to gather input, but make sure that it doesn't just stay at the local level, that it goes upward. And we're very anxious to hear about that and to monitor how this is going, so that if there are tweaks, and I know there are going to be tweaks, particularly when we did this CARES money with such speed, that I'm sure there are going to be some unintended consequences that we're going to need to go back and fix. And again, having communication for you to tell us what we did well, what we did wrong, and what needs to be done, that's critically important.
Great.
And that is one thing that is starting to happen at the statewide level. The communication union districts, the current ones or the proposed ones, are now meeting weekly to discuss this, identify problems, propose solutions, and really hold my feet to the fire to work with them and to get stuff happening around the state. And also, as you said, things happen very quick. When the legislation, when 966 was written, we thought we were going to have 8 communication districts. Now, by the end of this month or early next month, thanks to Franklin County here, we probably will have 9. So things are happening fast, and we're all doing what we can.
And if I could just do a quick shout out, not to like make this a big love fest or anything like that, but I would encourage all of you, if you're thinking about broadband and you have questions, reach out to the other communications union districts, reach out to Rob. We all have the same mission, and that's to get everybody broadband. So, I'm here not because, I'm going to be served when Franklin County gets fiber, but because I see the value of everybody having fiber. It's, the equity and this kind of the social justice issue around equal access to actual 21st century, telecommunications infrastructure. The legislature thankfully is, been solidly, from CV Fiber's perspective, solidly in our corner as we're trying to go and build out those places where the market has failed and has not been able to serve us, or serve us as members of the community. So again, please take advantage of those resources that are out there. And I mean, and for that matter, Ben and USDA Rural Development too, they were incredibly helpful for us early on. And unfortunately, we've been around for a while. We didn't get to have Rob from the beginning, but yeah, definitely take advantage of everything that's in his brain. He's got some good stuff in there.
Thank you. Ed, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to add to the discussion is, as I think about the various ways that this is going to, hopefully get done over the next few years, one thing I just wanted to bring up is, in addition to community involvement and getting your voices heard, I do think it's going to take sort of a private-public partnership, most likely, to get this done. So I know also that, especially in my neck of the woods here in the Northeast Kingdom, there have been some issues with private-public partnerships in the news you've all read about. But at the end of the day, I think we're going to have to be, accepting of private partners in this. I don't think this is all going to be a 100% municipality or community effort where networks are owned by municipalities and run by municipalities. I think there'll be some of that, but I also think to get this done, there's going to be private companies that come in, and certainly we all want to do our own vetting and diligence on those companies, but I think acceptance of that for the right partners will go a long way toward getting this network and these networks built out. So I just, a bit of an about face from my earlier point about community involvement and engagement. I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that as well.
No, I think that's a really great point. Thank you for that. Sean, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, good point, Ed. There's lots of different formations of community broadband networks. Out west, they do some really creative solutions of, they have multiple providers like Utopia Fiber and things like that. They do multiple, providers on the same network, really having a large provider of choice, or a large group of provider of choice, really helps improve their conditions out there, and drives down their price. Rob, something I was thinking of that might be helpful, and this is kind of, it made me think of it when Jeremy was talking about shared resources, is maybe we can gather a point of contacts list of all the different folks in all the different regions, and share that information. So should we have information, or should we have questions, or need advice on something? I know that was, when I started this process, that was my struggle, or I didn't, Everett and I haven't met until just now, and that's great that we'll be able to connect, and it'd be great to be able to have that information of who to reach out to in the different areas.
That's fantastic, and I think so clearly there's a need for it, right? I mean, it's just people shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel, and I know Rob and the department's doing a great job of making sure there's information sharing, but the more we can do, the better. Rob, do you have something you want to say?
I just wanted to say that I posted another link into the chat that has the contact info for each of the CUDs that currently exist. It doesn't have the contact info for the ones that are about to be started, but we have also started a listserv, this new, I can't even remember what the acronym is, like FACUDA or something. It's the consortium of all the different CUDs, has started where you can pose questions if you're getting started, and to share resources. And the last thing we want to do is reinvent the wheel. We went through all this in March and have lots of resources to help any community group that wants to get started to leapfrog over the experience of, it took EC Fiber 10 years to accomplish what they've accomplished, which is amazing what they've accomplished, but we can't wait that long. Vermont can't wait that long right now. The other thing I wanted to add, and this is a direct response to what happened with COVID-19, is we now have many additional partners that weren't at the table before, and it's essential that as a community that you talk to your healthcare providers, that you talk to your schools, get them at the table early and often. They have the capability to help you leverage resources, whether it's financial or whether it's knowledge, and community support. So that's my one more piece of advice, is to bring everybody together.
Yeah, that's excellent. And I think the idea, right, of you've got, maybe previous to COVID, you've got the folks that were really interested in this issue around the table talking about how do we advance it. But now if you can start to bring in some of those critical institutional partners that have also, see a new sense of urgency, whether it's healthcare, education, I think that you're right, that there are great resources there. Anybody else want to talk about what needs to happen again at the local level, at the state level, or excuse me, at the regional level or at the state level? Any kind of other ideas of what you feel like? Again, I think the point of these kinds of conversations is for the visiting team to hear you, to record your ideas, and then share them around the state, but also for policymakers and funders to really make sure that they're getting their marching orders from the people that they're meant to serve. So any other kind of key points? Kim, I wonder, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm going to. I wonder if you might, from where you're sitting, again, as a private company, and I wouldn't just limit it to broadband, really thinking, as Senator Brock was talking about, telecommunications writ large. From an industry kind of perspective, what do you see that folks can do at both the local level, and you had mentioned some ideas about talk to your neighbors about taking up the service to bring it down, but any other ideas of things that folks should be doing?
I think part of it too is in education, which I'm not sure the best way to do it. The end game is fiber to the home, but a quick solution is in some cases we throw up remotes that I can get them, actually I can get them 50-50 on a VDSL connection within a mile. There's other solutions out there, but it's I always come back to communications. You talk to the providers to see what is your hang up. Sometimes your hang up is you just have really bad Wi-Fi in your house, and it's not an internet issue at all. It's the Wi-Fi issue, or you've got a kid streaming in the bedroom that you don't know it's streaming. A game.
I'm familiar with that problem.
Yeah, a gamer. There's something else I was going to add to that. Oh, lost my train of thought. Yeah, the Eagles behind me, so like
I
distracted.
just wondered if I could just kind of chime in for a minute.
Please, Marilyn.
Yeah.
Kim, we can come back to you, but Marilyn, you've been waiting for a minute. Thank you. Go ahead, please.
I did raise my hand and I don't think anybody saw me, but
I'm
that's
sorry,
okay.
that's my fault.
If you could come back to me, that I'll mute myself again.
No. Oh, Marilyn, I'm sorry. Please go ahead. Yeah, we would love to hear from you.
Now, all I wanted to say is I wondered what we were doing in relationship to communicating with other states. Years and years ago, I was principal in Enosburg. It's going back 30, 40 years now. And one of the things that we did is we put satellites on all of the high schools. And then what happened is that nobody knew how to use them except for maybe Enosburg and CVU and a couple of places out there and Proctor. But we've been so far behind for so many years. I can go back. I used to go off and present what we were doing, in Vermont at various, symposiums and conferences and stuff. And it was amazing. So I'm wondering I don't know anymore. I'm not connected out of state. What do we do in terms of talking to our neighbors, to other states, especially out on the West Coast? And in the Midwest, they were doing fantastic things. Even states like Oklahoma and Kansas, because that's where some of the teachers and myself from Enosburg were traveling to make these presentations on. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say.
Marilyn, that's really great. Thank you for sharing that. I think you're exactly right that we have a tendency, particularly I think in moments like this, to want to think like super local. But there's so much we can learn regionally and nationally, even internationally, about what's working in this space. So that's a really great point. I saw Jeremy had his.
Yeah, I just wondered, are we doing any of that now, or are we just pretty much staying within Vermont? I know we have a lot to do here in Vermont, and there are only so many people that there's only so much manpower. But I think it's so important that we look what's going on in the rest of the world, because they're not that we're not doing great things, but we could be doing greater things. We could learn from others. That's all. I'll go off.
That's great. Thank you, Marilyn. That's excellent. I'll just say quickly, I do know that there are organizations that are working on a kind of regional basis in the Northeast, like USDA has funded the Northern Forest Center, which is based out of Concord, New Hampshire, but which works across northern New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. And they're doing some work in broadband in exactly this kind of thing of trying to do information sharing, technical assistance, building capacity for folks to develop local solutions. I see we've got a couple different hands up. I'm going to go to Jeremy and then Senator Brock. Jeremy, please.
Let everybody else go first. I'm good for the moment.
Great. Senator Brock, would you like to go?
I just wanted to answer Marilyn's question, if I could. We do coordinate with other states. Certainly the legislature does in writing our legislation and looking at how to allocate funds and looking at various solutions. We coordinate through the National Association, Associated State Legislatures, the Committee of State Governments, the Council of State Governments, and so on. So we did get a lot of input in looking at what other people were doing so that we weren't going off and reinventing the wheel. So that a lot of that is in fact going on.
That's great. Thank you. Jeremy, did you want to add something?
Sure. So it's actually a bit of a question for Kim, and it's sort of a follow-up to, I think, Ed, you said you were talking about public-private partnerships, just asking Kim, is Franklin Telephone interested if a CUD forms in Franklin County and they start building fiber? Would Franklin Telephone be willing to operate that network? Because we are not looking in Central Vermont to operate our own network. If we have to, we will. But we're looking at other folks, other incumbents, to actually do that. So if that's something Franklin Telephone is willing to do, ultimately the CUD would own the fiber and would essentially own the subscribers, but would pay Franklin Telephone to actually do the all the back office and the maintenance and all that work. Is that something that would be interesting?
And Kim, don't feel that you need to answer that definitively right now on the record, but it's a great question, Jeremy.
Jeremy has a piece of paper he wants you to sign right now.
Yeah. You know, we're always looking, so nothing's ruled out. But I do know, being in this, so we started with dial-up service 20 years ago, 19 years ago. And in that short 19-year window, we've been through, I think, at least 4 different equipment overhauls, like complete equipment, throw it out, new equipment. That's 5 years of equipment, a life of equipment. So willing to have discussions and stuff. It's not one of those things that you build a network and then you're done, because everything keeps evolving, especially with electronics and technology. I mean, you look at, how many of you have the same phone that you've had for 3 years? You just get a new one. And so it's the same with equipment upgrade. The fiber stays the same, but I don't rule it out. I'm always up for discussion. So, but I prefer to, we've been very happy doing our own little thing up here. And it is a challenge. I'll tell you, for the community union districts, there's a lot of hurdles. I'm fortunate that I own the poles. So, but downside, if a car hits a pole, I have to fix the pole. So,
Well, thank you
for discussion.
Yeah, it sounds to me like there's a great conversation to be had, if nothing else, to even just understand the lay of the land in the region. Rob, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to go back to what I said about finding all the possible partners in your community. And one group that I left out are the libraries. The state library system is very committed to digital literacy. And it's something that you should look at in your area when you're trying to create the demand for the service. Because like, as with Kim's experience, most times people will take the lower level service because they don't necessarily know what's possible. And having that type of training available, like I know back when I first got involved in this digital literacy stuff, there was this is through VCRD, go figure. There was digital literacy interns at several different libraries that did various workshops and training and that type of hand-holding to try to raise the level of digital literacy in the entire community. And that needs to be a part of any effort.
Great, thanks. Great point, Rob. Kimmer, I think you have your hand raised. Are you battling the flies out there?
I got a horse fly, and so challenges with being outside. Oh, now I got distracted by the horse fly. Sorry, it was on Rob's point, and now I lost it. So
well, he was talking about digital literacy in libraries and the need to help educate people about kind of the realm of the possible of what they could do with the technology.
Yeah, and I can't emphasize enough. So we have a list in our office of people that want fiber, and we try to accommodate them. And so this spring we finally, we got all ready, and we called up like the 3 people on our list. Like, today's your day, and they're like, oh, I'm really good. I don't want it. So it's. There's a frustration as a provider, and I know some of you are sitting there like, want fiber so bad, but the reality is people don't want to pay very much for, even though it's going to give them education and telemedicine and jobs. They also have that economic. They only want to pay for the minimum that they need. I see that a lot.
Yeah. Thank you, Kim. So I just want to be cognizant of the time that we have left. We have a little less than, about 10 minutes left. And if it's okay with everyone, and if it's okay with the kind of visiting team, I mean, it's been great. You guys have been participating in the conversation all along. But I'm wondering if I could ask you to just kind of summarize or succinctly, give folks two or three either strategies or key resources that you think are helpful to improving this issue in the region, right? So kind of like your greatest hits, Rob, right? Like, what are the kind of top 3 things, if you were providing advice to a region, about all the kind of challenges and issues that you've heard, what are the kind of 1 or 2 really key strategies or resources that you think folks should take advantage of?
Sure. The first thing I would say is don't live in a bubble. Your own town is just your town. Think regionally, talk to your neighbors, work together to accomplish something larger. Town boundaries don't matter when it comes to broadband. It's where the wires go, where the roads go, and where the mountains are. So that would be the top thing that I would tell everybody is get involved, talk to your neighbors. The second thing would be just what I said about digital literacy. There's two parts to this equation. There's building the infrastructure and there's creating the demand.
Great. Thank you, Rob. Excellent. Ed, would you mind if I put you on the spot to go next?
No, I think Rob just summed it up really well. Maybe the only thing I would add is, it's I really think now is the time to get this done, and the community involvement. And as Rob mentioned, that's not following town lines. That's going to be more regional, or maybe even funnier lines than that, based on other geographic boundaries. But ultimately, I think the sun is rising on this, and I think Vermont will hopefully, knock on wood, be a beneficiary of stimulus funds and dollars that come in, and we can all get this done together. But it's going to be pretty nuanced in terms of how we do get there. And the other part of it, which really is out of our control, but I think is more of a definite community effort. And I heard loud and clear tonight, is the whole education and affordability part of this equation, which I think is critical, and we all in our own communities need to take on that effort. So that's really, really great hearing that input for me tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Really appreciate it. And then Jeremy, do you have, kind of, again, if you can think of 1, 2, maybe 3, like key things that a piece of its advice or strategy resources that you would want to share with the community?
Sure. I mean, and I think it's basically going to echo what Rob and Ed already said. I mean, I think this is a don't wait moment. Everybody wants to see this. Everybody knows that, we all need this, but nobody's going to do it for you. Somebody, you, are going to have to step up and move this forward. I'm very, very encouraged that the last couple of years, the legislature, again, thank you legislators, have seen the writing on the wall, and even before the COVID crisis, started moving to get this front and center. But it's not going to happen unless there's somebody, basically like one person in each town. Again, if these conversations aren't happening, the kind of the community-based solutions are also not going to happen. Make some noise, talk to some other people, talk to Rob, talk to Ben. CUDs are one way to do it. I don't think they're the only way. I'm super biased because we are looking at a $4.5 million project. We'll be building 100 miles of fiber next year. So I'm confident that ours is going to, our model is going to work. But you're right, it's not the only one out there. But it requires somebody to get motivated and just to start moving on this. It doesn't even have to be big steps. Just start moving on it.
I'm just going to add one more thing to what I said. I had 2, only do 3, but it's don't forget about the people in your town that aren't located in the densest area of the towns. There's a real risk right now of being able to get, whether it's cable or fiber, built out to the densest areas. The challenge with that is that it reduces the case for everybody else in the community. So it's a difficult position. You don't want to deny increased connectivity to anybody, but you want to provide it for everyone. And if anyone has a solution to that $1 million question, do let me know. But it's something to be aware of and think about.
No, that's a really great point.
It's still a business. I mean, we're a municipality, but it's still a business. We still have to pay the bills. You still have to pay off the cost of the fiber. I mean, so.
Great point. Does anybody else in the group want to, who maybe even hasn't had an opportunity to chime in yet? Sean, please.
There it goes.
There you go.
2 resources that I've found quite helpful in my prior life is Fiber Broadband Association is a great resource. from what I've found, they really cater, and much of their programming is to really help muni networks and CUDs. And also for digital literacy and security, the Mozilla Foundation is a great resource to pull information from. So those two resources, I want to make everyone aware of those.
Great, thanks so much. You know, I feel remiss not to have done this before, but I want to make sure that everybody understands that this session, I think, is being recorded, and we're Adele from the Regional Planning Association has been taking kind of copious notes that will really help us share this information with the entire visiting team and the governor's task force. So I just want to thank her for doing all that work. I just want to I would just maybe close with some reflections from where I sit at USDA Rural Development. We do a lot of funding of broadband infrastructure, but to me, the money is obviously is the huge issue. But what I find in any kind of community development project, including broadband, is without the local leadership, nothing moves forward.